This is the Tame Aperture podcast.
Open the pod bay doors, Cal.
I'm sorry, Dave. I'm afraid I can't do that.
Welcome to the Tame Aperture podcast, where we discuss movies from first-time directors, indie films, art house, and much, much more. Today on the show, we continue Horror Month with the 1974 slasher classic by Toby Hooper, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, starring Marilyn Burns as Sally and Gunnar Hansen as the murderous cannibal Leatherface. So listen in and join the discussion as we go deep into this horror classic right here on the Tame Aperture podcast. I'm Gabe Vienendahl, filmmaker, film instructor, and movie enthusiast, and I'm joined by veteran podcaster and horror film fanatic, Alan Martindale. Alan, how are you?
Dude, I'm doing so good. I'm so excited to talk about this.
Good. I'm excited to hear what you have to say.
Well, because last time we did Nightmare on Elm Street, and that's kind of your childhood trauma movie, and this one is mine. This is the one that got me into horror movies. And
that's what I wanted to ask you right out the gate when we start talking Chainsaw Massacre, which is I shared the personal relationship in a sense that I have with A Nightmare on Elm Street, being a kid,
right,
seeing it when I shouldn't have, etc. So I want to open it up there. What's your relationship with this film? And you chose this one, so why and what's your backstory behind it?
So this one, I had seen a couple horror movies, and I'd seen Halloween, and I loved Halloween. It scared me, but it wasn't traumatic by any stretch. Like it was good, and I still love it. I mean, I have a Michael Myers tattoo, and so I love it, but it wasn't traumatizing by any stretch. And I'd seen Night of the Living Dead and kind of the campy old stuff, but it wasn't, so it was okay. I could take it or leave horror. But then I saw this movie, and it just, from the opening crawl, it just messed me up. I think I had to have been, when I saw this, it was a little bit later. I think I was probably in junior high, late junior high, early high school, and it just traumatized me. The opening crawl is so dark, and it kind of, it prepares you that what you're about to see is just gonna, it's messed up, and it feels real. And I just was, as I was rewatching this movie, I was kind of going through and remembering. I remember quite vividly all of my emotions the first time I saw this movie. And I every time I watch it, it's like, oh man, this is the part where I was freaking out when the hitchhiker gets in the car, and it just, it took me through all that again, and it just traumatized me. And ever since then, I think I've been addicted to horror because I'm trying to find a movie that makes me feel like this did the first time.
Interesting, yeah.
And that's what I'm searching for when I watch horror movies now.
That's really interesting. So I want to actually read quickly, and not to get off tangent, but I want to read a synopsis of the film for those that haven't seen the film yet, or those that might be listening in on this podcast and go like, hey, I want to read, or I want to know what it is they're talking about throughout the rest of this cast. So quickly, here's a quick summary of the film. It says, and tell me when I'm done if it's accurate. We played into this a little bit early or later in the podcast last time. When Sally hears that her grandfather's grave may have been vandalized, she and her paraplegic brother Franklin set out with their friends to investigate. After a detour to their family's old farmhouse, they discover a group of crazed, murderous outcasts living next door, as the group is attacked one by one by the chainsaw-wielding Leatherface, who wears a mask of human skin. The survivors must do everything they can to escape. So that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
We're talking about a murderous, chainsaw-wielding psychopath.
The only thing I take a little umbrage with that is you hear that and you think it's just a standard horror movie. Mm-hmm. But to me, it's not at all. And I know other people will probably see this now, and they'll think it, they'll watch it, and it won't have that effect that it had on me. Because I showed it to my girlfriend. She was kind of dipping her toe into the horror, and I was like, all right, we've worked up to it. Now we're going to watch the worst. This is the worst. And she watched it, and she's like, I guess it was creepy. It was good. But it didn't have that effect on her.
See, and that's what's interesting. So for me, I haven't seen this. Now, we talked about Nightmare. I watch it every year. I've seen it 20 times. Now, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, haven't seen since I was 17.
Right.
So for this, prepping for this podcast, it was almost like going into it as a first-time watch.
Okay.
And I couldn't be, I don't think, at least, now I couldn't be more on the opposite side of your girlfriend.
Okay.
Which is, it's terrifying.
It's so scary.
But what makes it terrifying for me is the authenticity or the reality of the world.
Yes.
So when we talked to Nightmare, the thing we liked about Nightmare, or that we thought was interesting, was we're playing between these two worlds.
Mm-hmm.
There's fantasy and there's reality, and then there's dream state, and all these different kind of interactions between what's real and what's not. And immediately in this film, it's all set with an authentic tone from the very first scroll of the title, where they give you exposition and they basically tell you what this film is about right out the gate.
And the way it's worded, the way it's worded, it doesn't say this is a true story, but it makes you think, this happened. This had to have happened. Just the way they word it and the ominous tone of it. And John Larroquette does a perfect reading of it. And it just freaks you out.
It's definitely real, and you get the vibe immediately, and they don't say based on a true story, but immediately the vibe is there that it is a true story.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Especially the way they word it at the end when they're talking about people never would have thought this would have happened, and this is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Right.
And you're like, that's a real event.
Yeah, exactly. It's terrifying.
It's absolutely scary. And so for me, rewatching it again, I couldn't be on more of an opposite side.
Right.
And so tell me a little bit about the initial spook. In other words, like once after the scroll, what is it that starts to draw you into the film and start making you think, okay, this is frightening?
Well, it could have gone off the rails very quickly, because after they get through the scroll and you have all the shots of the dug up bodies, they go to Franklin on the side of the road taking a piss into a coffee mug or whatever, coffee
can.
Yeah. And then he falls, and he's just such a cartoonish character. Right then, it could have immediately gone off the rails, be like, oh, this is campy and stupid.
By the way, why did he fall? I know he's a paraplegic, but what did he get scared?
The truck came by in the background, and the wind just, I guess, blew him over.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't know. It's bizarre.
Yeah.
It's bizarre.
It's a random incident, and all of a sudden he's rolling down the hill and he's on the ground.
Exactly.
Does it have any significance, or is it just there?
It might. I haven't dove that deep into it. I don't think so.
Okay, I don't think so either.
I think
I'm
you're just trying
wondering.
to understand that he's very, very helpless.
Yeah.
And these guys are kind of taking care of him.
The tone for me, and it might be just kind of a breath of air of comedy in a sense, because the thing about the opening too is that after the scroll, like we talked about, it's real. It feels like it's a real statement being read. But everything that Hooper does up in that first part of the film, where we see flashes of death.
Yeah.
We see flashes of decomposed bodies. And then we hear, not only are we visually being stimulated about this surrounding of death, but we're also hearing news reports about everything dealing with death, which is like, there's a death in this state, there's a death in this city. And they're not like necessarily just murderous moments, but they're actually like, oh, this family or this person died in a car accident. It's all death.
Yep.
Everything. And then it cuts to the cemetery, which is the epitome of death.
Yep.
And so from the very get-go, it's just this world of like, this is the theme of this film. Like, he's not hiding anything. He's not saying, well, at least it's part of the theme, which is like, we're going to discover what it means to die.
Right.
To some extent.
Exactly. And he does it incredibly well throughout the whole film. And just, I guess we'll talk about this later. I get so excited about this movie that I'm like, and then this happens, and this happens. Yeah. But it's actually...
We'll try to work through the linear fashion of what the film is, because we're kind of talking about the scroll, we're talking about the opening scenes, so we'll try to work through it that way.
But as far as we're saying it feels real, and it absolutely does, but for a movie that has, I don't want to say a documentary feel, but it kind of does have that. It's very technically done. There's a lot of camera movement, a lot of dolly shots, a lot of really cinematic techniques, but they still manage to make it feel like you're in this world. Like when they're in the van, you can just smell and feel the heat. Like you can just feel it. Everywhere they go, you get all of your senses can totally just absorb what is going on around them.
I mean, the actors are literally sweating.
Yes.
And as soon as you know that it's set in the environment is South Texas in August. And you're thinking about Houston and those kind of cities, even not if anyone's never been to Houston or South Texas in the middle of the summer,
brutal.
It's literally hell.
Yep.
When it comes to the heat and the humidity.
Yep.
So it's interesting there because once again, you're playing into that tone of death and putting it into an environment that is the kind of the embodiment of hell, which is it's hot, it's humid, it's sticky.
You can't escape it.
You can't escape it. You can't get away from it. There's no relief.
Right.
You know, so I think immediately, once again, in every tone that I can think of, he's hinting on this idea of just death.
Exactly.
From the get-go.
Exactly.
And it does have it does have a documentary feel to it. And like you mentioned, there are cinematic techniques. And it's shot well for what it's shot on and what it's shot for in the time frame that it's shot in the early 70s, early to mid 70s.
Well, Daniel Pearl, the cinematographer, I thought did a great job because it's not like Nightmare on Elm Street. We talked about how the shots were actually beautiful.
Yeah,
these
some
shots,
of them are gorgeous.
I would say these shots are effective.
Yeah.
And that's why I think he did a fantastic job of capturing this world. As much as you give credit to Toby Hooper, I think Daniel Pearl, the cinematographer, really painted the picture of this entire world that we're in.
Yeah, absolutely. And it does have there's this cinema verite style.
Yeah.
So cinema verite is documentary. It's fly on the wall observational viewpoints.
Yep.
Because the other thing is immediately, like, even though you feel it and you're there in it, I never experienced it as if I was part of the group.
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
So, like, there's times where you're, like, seeing things perspectively through that person. And for me, I never experienced that, but I was observationally there just kind of observing what these people were doing.
It felt like you were watching these things happen
in real time.
These people. Exactly.
Absolutely. So that definitely plays into it. And it's not, even though he's alluding to death in everything that he does from the very get-go, for the first, it's not really scary, is it? Was it the first 10, 15 minutes of the film? Is there anything that frightens you or is like, it's...
No, I think I had a sense of dread just based on the opening scroll.
Yep.
And then up to the point where the hitchhiker gets in. That's when I really started.
Right. And so for me, he's kind of building the world.
Exactly.
It's like, here it is. It's real. It's authentic.
Right.
We're not doing anything over the top. These are real people in real environments.
Yes.
And so it's got the macabre in it because you're going to the cemetery and all these kind of things and you're hearing the stories of death. But it's just like, this is life.
Right. Well, it's a real plausible thing why they would go to that cemetery.
Yeah.
Why they'd be set up. You're worried about your relative. Were they dug up in this horrific crime that happened?
And part of the backstory to that, for those that haven't seen it, is you're hearing that on the radio, and someone's gone and exhumed 12 bodies from a cemetery, and these two of these kids' grandfather is in that cemetery.
Exactly.
And so there, like you said, it's plausible. Well, let's go check out this cemetery, make sure that grandpa's remains are okay.
Right. It brings it back to this old town that they grew up in, or they spent some time in. There is kind of something comical there too, though, because when they arrive at the cemetery, it's a little offbeat. In other words, like, who are these people that are overseeing it? Like, there's some older gentlemen there. It's like they're supposed to be cops, but they're not, and their tone is very happy.
Their tone is happy, and the one guy is absurdly drunk.
Oh yeah.
Who is that?
So
is that? I thought they said that was the sheriff.
Maybe it was,
and I may have misplaced that.
This is, as far as I know, I'm sure that there have been other instances in other horror movies previous to this, but this is the first harbinger that I've seen in a horror movie, which is the character that's kind of warning you to stay away and like there's some bad stuff going on here.
Yeah.
And he's drunk and he's saying, I see things around here we don't talk about.
And it's funny you bring that up because as we go through some of this story and these characters in this scene, that's a great analytical viewpoint because throughout the film, there's constant warnings.
Yes.
Constantly warned.
Yep.
constantly warned all the way through the film. And so maybe that's what he's alluding to. And maybe that's what it's funny though, because I literally thought he was I thought they were pointing over there.
Because they did. And then
he says to the sheriff,
Right.
and he's drunk lying on his back, and he's
Right.
giving him a warning about these kind of things
Right.
that are happening. Yeah. So they establish this great world. It feels real. We feel like we're part of it. For me, I don't feel like, I'm in it, and it does, but I feel like I'm observing it, and it makes it real and scary for me that way. And a couple things I wanted to talk about on was once we and nothing's overtly creepy at that point. It's just a little off.
Right.
And then we introduce, as they're going through, driving down, they decide to pick up Hitchhiker. That's literally his name.
That's
I think
his name.
in the name.
That's his character name.
The character name. And they pick this guy up, and tell me about this guy and what your impressions are of this character.
This is when, and again, rewatching this, I was going through all the same feelings I had the first time. I can vividly remember every scene and how I felt in watching those scenes for the first time. This is when the dread really starts to happen, because it cuts. First, it shows the group. They're all huddled on one side of the van. So obviously, we haven't even seen this guy yet. But the fact that they are on the opposite side of the van tells you something's up with this dude.
Yeah.
And then I think Franklin says, we just picked up Dracula. And then it cuts to him, and the hitchhiker has this just grotesque, it's not a scar, it's a birthmark, I think, on his face.
That's what it looks like.
And he is just insane. And I don't know how, and I can't remember the actor's name, but I don't know how he played that character. Because I think you have to be insane to play him that well and in that way. But man, it just gets bizarre, and you just have this feeling like he can do anything. Anything can happen right now. And they're trapped in this van with him.
His name's Edwin Neal.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
And,
Yep.
and I'm just looking it up here. And his performance, it feels like it's him. Like you can't, like you're mentioning, you can't get into, I mean, first off, acting is a difficult skill.
Mm-hmm.
It's not easy to act. It's just not. It's hard to, for me at least, and I've done some, and I studied film and also tried to act, and I did a couple acting classes at the university, and I suck.
It's hard. I'm terrible too.
I'm terrible.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's hard to
very
embody something else if it doesn't feel real to me.
Right.
And actors are good at being able to step outside themselves and then become something else. So it's either one of two things. Either he's a good actor and he's stepping outside of himself, or he is literally a little bit crazy as a person.
And I've kind of purposely avoided seeing anything else he's in or hearing interviews with him, because I don't want that view of him to be ruined for me.
Now, admittedly, when we're talking about this character, the hitchhiker, I ended up watching, and we won't get too far into this tangent, but just so you know, I did end up watching actually rewatching Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2.
Oh, yeah.
It's on Amazon Prime, and I couldn't resist.
Right.
And I want to say he's in that film, too.
I think...
Is it the same guy?
I don't think so, because they have Chop Top in the second one, right? And that is that's the guy who's in all the Rob Zombie movies. Oh, geez. I'm totally spacing on
it's
his
a
name.
different guy.
I think so. Chop Top's a different guy.
Okay. And what's funny, so I know you're talking, so Chop Top's the guy with the metal skull.
Yeah, yeah.
And
he plays Otis in House of a Thousand Corpses and Devil's Rejects.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay. For some reason, I was associating these as the same person, because Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 happens they made it like 13 years later.
Right.
So
much different movie.
Much different movie. We won't get into that tangent, but I actually thought they were the same guy initially. Now you're saying that, I'm going, okay, they're not.
Yeah.
But this hitchhiker character is utterly disturbing.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody in the car is absolutely scared by him.
They're terrified.
Immediately. Except
Franklin.
Yeah.
Except Franklin.
Because Franklin
he's
fascinated. He's absolutely fascinated with this guy. And there's this scene where I'm trying to get some context on this, and maybe you have an idea. Because when Hitchhiker takes Franklin's knife and he cuts himself, we know immediately that he's crazy.
Right.
I mean, nobody and Franklin alludes to it later, which is like, it takes something for a man to cut himself.
Right.
We know he's crazy. Now, then he takes the Polaroid. Now, I'm trying to get context on this because he takes a Polaroid of Franklin and then asks Franklin for money.
Right.
That's $2. It's a good picture.
Right.
And everyone's like, this guy, now we know he's crazy. We already kind of knew, but now we really know.
It's established.
Completely established. Now, the question I have for you is, they don't, of course, pay him the money for the Polaroid. Why did he burn the picture?
Who knows?
And where did he get, I guess it's just gunpowder?
I think it's gunpowder. But who knows? I've watched this movie. I don't know how many times I've seen it. I don't know. But that's kind of the charm, not the charm, but the sadistic charm of this character. Is he'll do anything. He'll do anything. And the part that, this scene got me so much because when he hands him the picture and he's like, it's a good picture. It's a good picture. And you just want Franklin to placate him. Just say, yeah, it's a good picture. But instead he's like, sure didn't come out too good. Yeah. And Franklin just keeps saying whatever's on the front of his brain. And it's like, just make him happy. Yeah. You don't want him to go insane. And Franklin, and this is part of why it's so easy to just hate Franklin. Because he's just the most hateable character. You just want to punch his fat face.
Now, wait a minute. I got those twisted, didn't I? Because he cuts after.
So first the hitchhiker cuts himself.
He takes Franklin's knife and cuts him.
And cuts himself, yes. And then he takes the picture and burns the picture.
That's right. So I'm in the right order.
Yes.
And then when he
pulls out his own knife, that's when you're like, holy shit.
It's not a knife. It's a razor, like an old school razor.
Right, right.
And then after they don't placate him and they don't say, oh yeah, it's a good picture. Because you're right. In logically for me, I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to tell him it's a good picture because I want him to like be, to put, set it aside. And then he doesn't. And then he takes his own razor knife, the hitchhiker does, and cuts Franklin.
Well, and the part that, because Franklin won't placate him, but Kurt, he's like, it's a good knife. And he's like, I'm sure it is, man. Just put it away. Yeah. And those are kind of the two dynamics of these two characters. But then he cuts Franklin. Right. And it's just, it's chaos. It's chaos in the van. It's chaos everywhere. It's insane.
It's a disturbing scene. And then eventually they end up getting him out of the van and he wipes like blood on it. Yep. And at that point, Franklin can never get Hitchhiker out of his mind.
Exactly. He's fascinated.
There's
something about death that fascinates Franklin because he's fascinated with the slaughterhouse and how they kill the cows. Yeah. There's something about that kind of stuff that he can't get out of his head.
And it goes back to this theme that it's just sprinkled throughout the entire movie. Everything's death.
Everything's death.
Everything. Like every little nuance. And you talk about the slaughterhouse and they drive by the slaughterhouse and Franklin can't not talk about how he went there once. Right. And he saw how they killed him and he gets kind of energetic and excited about how they do it.
Exactly. And he even bonds with the hitchhiker over it.
Yeah. Right. On how they do it.
Well, and later on, we're talking about death a lot. Later on, I'll tell you there are theories about what this movie's really about.
Interesting.
We can talk about
that. Those are good. I want to hear those because that's the one thing that in my notes as I was watching it, like I know that he's trying to say something about death immediately.
Right.
It's just surrounded. He just inundates you with it all over. So they hitchhiker gets out of the van. Eventually they get him out. He wipes his blood all over the van after cutting himself. They go to they end up getting to the barbecue joint.
Did you notice the name of these are the little tidbits I know.
The name was it was
We Slaughter Barbecue.
Yep. Right, that's right.
It's great.
Yeah,
great. I love it.
So little hints again of who the villains are.
Exactly.
Like little hints are thrown throughout. Slaughterhouse.
Yeah.
I mean,
just more death.
Just everywhere.
Yep.
So they get to this barbecue joint, and what's interesting to me is Old Man, who's part of the family of cannibals, right? Mm-hmm. He kind of gives another forewarning to the kids.
And over the years, I've gone back and forth of why he does this. And I think it's probably because he doesn't want them stumbling upon, because the meat he's selling there, right, is obviously people.
Yes.
And I think he doesn't want them stumbling upon, first of all, Leatherface, because he's unhinged. And I just don't, he doesn't trust the other kids to take care of business. So I just think he probably didn't want them around there.
Is he, and also later they allude to the fact that Old Man doesn't have the stomach to kill.
Right.
Right?
He's just a cook. He's just a cook.
He just cooks it.
And I know he's credited as old man, but I always call him the cook.
Yeah. Are they all brothers?
Yes, they're all brothers.
Okay.
Yeah.
So just so we know, Leatherface, Old Man, and Hitchhiker are all part of one family.
Yep.
And they're brothers. So they get to the barbecue joint. Find it interesting. It's almost like he has a sense of sympathy.
Yeah,
because he says these girls don't want to be out here either. That's something a logical, sane person who knows something is bad.
Right.
And then okay, but doesn't want to divulge everything.
Right.
But it's
right.
like, hey, maybe you should just keep moving on. That's almost what a logical person would do.
Well, and later on he says something, some people just got to get killed. Doesn't mean you don't have to like it. Doesn't mean you have to like it. So there's something about him where, but he obviously enjoys it. But
I mean, he cooks the meat.
He cooks the meat, and we'll talk about it later. But he gets some sadistic pleasure over torturing people and hearing the screams and all that.
Yeah.
But maybe he doesn't want them to be killed. Maybe he doesn't like it, and he knows if they stumble across his place, they're gonna have to die.
Yeah.
So that could be it. I don't know. And
they get the warning, and they don't abide by it. They don't listen. They're young kids, so they just do what they're gonna do.
Yep.
And so I also found the plot point of like them returning to this old rundown abandoned house that they had visited when they were children, kind of I don't know why, but just kind of intriguing and actually a relatable thing, which is like, you might like that's once again, we go back to plausibility.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, that makes a lot of sense. I actually might want to go back and visit something that was part of the family or part
Absolutely.
and kind of see where it's at now and what it is. And so the desire to get them to the location that's ultimately going to be their demise is very reasonable.
Absolutely. It's not some crazy far off thing.
Because a lot of time in horror films, and I love horror too, but you'll see these real illogical moves.
Right.
These real illogical moves, very contrived. And in this case, I never really sensed that. It all kind of felt like the path they were supposed to go on.
Exactly.
Yeah. So they go, old man ends up giving them a warning. They don't abide. They get to the house. And they're kind of wandering around the house. I think it's Jerry.
Jerry's the hippie guy with the afro.
Oh, I got him and Kirk mixed up.
Yeah.
So Kirk goes in. There's this weird shot of spiders in the corner of the daddy long legs.
Yeah.
What is that doing there?
I don't know.
I think it's a creep tool, which is I got a little creeped out seeing this.
Absolutely. In fact, going back, talking about my girlfriend Jess, the first time she saw it, that was the scene.
That was the one.
And then one later we'll talk about, but that's the one that stuck with her the most until the big.
Isn't that funny? Because here's a weird kind of dichotomy between the film. We know the film's all about death.
Right.
It's based on cannibalism. And for some reason, also, a lot of scenes stick out for me. And it's funny that your girlfriend has this scene. But that scene still stuck out.
Right.
And it's just a bunch of daddy long legs.
That's it.
They're harmless.
But part of it is the sound, I think.
That's right.
Sound is used very effectively in this movie.
Yeah, they do use a little bit of sound there to kind of heighten the tension.
Yeah, you can hear them crawling. Like you can hear their little feet on the wall. It's creepy.
Right. So anyway, it's a funny thing because that's so minute compared to what's going to happen later.
Right. Exactly.
But it still stands out as a scene that's creepy.
Right.
And I feel like he's just throwing it in there to kind of just like have a little moment of like, ew.
Yeah, exactly. Make your skin crawl.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Literally. So they get to the house. They're wandering around. So up to this point, everybody's now kind of left Hitchhiker behind except for Franklin.
Yeah, still can't get him out of his head.
He cannot get him out of his head. And there's a scene where, by the way, when they left the barbecue joint, they got barbecue.
Yeah, they did.
They ate it.
And Franklin's got that sausage in his mouth
Franklin
forever.
is eating that barbecue, and it's finger licking good.
Yeah, loves it.
And it's people.
It's people.
But when he gets out, when they're at the house, and he sees the blood, he's fascinated by this guy, and he's nervous.
He keeps saying, "You don't think he'd try and follow us, do you?"
I don't think he'd try to follow us, do you? There's these interesting technical shots, too, in moments like that, where we use a lot of zoom lens.
Yeah. Yes.
So Franklin sees the blood, and he's got the big sausage or whatever piece of barbecue hanging out of his mouth, and he's looking at the blood on the van, and you just see this zoom in, and he kind of spits it out a little as if he knows.
Yeah.
No?
Something's going on here.
That's what I got insinuated, was like, he may not know the extent of it, but there's some weird thing that Franklin knows.
For sure.
Something.
Franklin, he's got a very good sense of when things are going wrong throughout this whole movie. A very good sense.
Yeah.
And later on, when it's nighttime, he knows. He knows something bad's about to happen.
But it's also kind of a cool technical approach from Hooper and the filmmakers, is that they keep doing this technique of like telling us that these characters are almost aware of what's the potential of going to happen.
Really good point.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
They're like, we're on the nose here a little bit, and we're going to push in on Franklin, and Franklin's going to have this look of like confusion, but also like, something's off.
Right.
And they're playing right into it.
Absolutely.
And it happens a few times throughout the film. I really like that they kind of just, it's once again his openness as a filmmaker to be like, here's what we're doing.
Right.
There's not a lot of hidden agenda to me.
No, I agree.
Doesn't mean there's not subtext. I just mean like he's not hiding anything in a secretive place. It's all out in the open.
All wide out in the open because it's realistic.
Right.
Again, it's more realistic. Like,
right.
I can picture myself being in Franklin's shoes. You know, that something traumatic just happened to you in the van, and this guy smears blood, and it looks like it's in some sort of sigil or something. I can imagine being freaked out and being worried about that.
This guy is crazy, and there's something deeper here.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think I love how they play into it.
Me too.
So they go out, and it ends up being, it's Pam, right? Is it Pam and Kirk?
Pam and Kirk.
That take the first journey out to go find some kind of, it's like a pond or
a creek or
something to swim in. And Franklin's telling him, it's just down the road between those two sheds. Yep. And so Pam and Kirk wander off, but not before Franklin notices something at his grandfather's abandoned house.
It's almost like they're little presents or gifts or something, or offerings. Just the bones on the porch. Yeah. And then almost the bone sculpture hanging from above.
Yeah. Some kind of decorative piece.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like someone's actually put a lot of time into the discipline and the artistry of killing, and then like using the pieces of the killing to create something.
Well, and it kind of calls back to the very beginning when you see the sculpture of corpses that they made on top of the grave.
Yeah.
Because someone put a lot of time and effort into making that piece of art.
And by the way, that is Hitchhiker, right?
Yeah,
that's divulged later that Hitchhiker was the one out there digging up the graves and making the artistry or putting up the pageantry of death.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Franklin notices that, but then Pam and Kirk make their way down, and then it's like there's the plot device where it's like gasoline. Mm-hmm. So the van's out of gas, or it's nearly out of gas. Pam and Kirk make their way down, and then it's in the distance we hear a generator, which it makes Kirk start thinking, oh, maybe there's gas.
Right.
I'll give him something, and we'll get some gas back so we can get the van going.
And I will say a generator in the distance sounds ominously like a chainsaw. I'll just say that. Yeah. It's just got that same.
It does.
And when I heard that and they started walking to it, I was just thinking, oh, dude, don't go.
and those are that, once again, they're never afraid to just say, don't do this.
Right.
Because once Pam and Kirk get to the house, Pam says like 5 times.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Like, let's go. She literally says, let's go, like 3 or 4 times.
They find a tooth on the porch.
And he plays it off. He gives it to her as a joke, and
right.
she's disgusted and goes and sits away, and then he walks in the house. But before that, she's literally said, let's go, let's go.
Right.
We don't need to gas. We don't need this. So there's all these chances.
Exactly.
And once again, it didn't feel forced either.
No,
it was just like, it was kind of the typical situation in a relationship to some extent, which is like the guy like machismo,
right?
Like we're good,
it's
and
fine.
the girl having a good intuition and going, maybe this isn't the best idea.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a horror trope now, but I don't think it was back then. I mean, this is 1974. This came out, so I think this kind of helped establish those.
So really, I mean, and I could be off here, and and people can call me out in the comments if they want. That's what I want.
Right. Right.
But yeah, this kind of establishes a lot of different either tropes or just kind of plot devices used in horror, and it kind of it kind of reignites the genre. When you think about horror films, by the way, it's you've got your traditional Universal films. You've got Creature from the Black Lagoon, Wolfman, Dracula, Frankenstein.
Right.
These are traditional Hollywood horror films from the 30s.
Mm-hmm.
And then it kind of, there's different things that make their way through, and there's and then you get to a time kind of in the later early 60s, and you'll even take something as big blockbuster as Psycho from Hitchcock,
yep,
which is a horror film through and through. And that kind of reverberates in a different way than what the classic horror monsters were before.
Right.
So Hitchcock actually has a little turning point in helping kind of redirect some of the genre to a degree.
Absolutely.
And then that's in the early 60s. And I know I'm missing some here, but just to get through the through line, you get into this early 70s and you have Texas Chainsaw, and then it also reinvigorates different styles and
yep,
themes about what it means to be a horror film.
Yeah, because then comes Halloween.
And then after that,
Friday the 13th, and then Nightmare on Elm Street, and it just kind of snowballs
It snowballs from there. And also, what I think helps the horror genre in the late 60s, early 70s is that censorship opens up.
Yes.
With Hitchcock Psycho, the reason it's filmed the way it is and the reason he executes the shots the way he does is because actually there's censorship rules, and you can't show, nudity,
right,
and you can't show certain things when it comes to blood and those kind of things. And censorship in the later 60s, early 70s opens up quite a bit, and it allows for the genre to really dive into these things and these themes of grotesque, murderous kind of villains.
It's interesting you say that because they were trying to go for a PG rating in this movie.
I read somewhere that that's what they were trying to do.
And if you watch it, there's very little gore. There's like no gore. There's very little blood at all in this movie. But it doesn't feel that way. It does,
and that's what's interesting, and that'll actually take us nicely into what they do well when Kirk walks into the house. And Pam's outside waiting, and first off, that's definitely been now established as a trope, which is like an empty house.
Yes.
And the person going up and go, anybody home?
Absolutely. Well, and then it comes to, this might be my favorite scene, not just in any horror movie, but in any movie, is the reveal of Leatherface.
Okay, tell me why.
First of all, in most horror movies, they're hinting at a villain, even if you don't see it. They're hinting at it, that something's there. There's no sense at all. There's no hinting that Leatherface is lurking anywhere. He hears Kurt, kind of peeks in the door, hears a pig squealing, which is Gunnar Hansen, who played Leatherface. He spent a long time listening to pig squeal just so we can get that right.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's interesting. And then Kurt goes in, and all of a sudden, this big figure, and I'm going to try and calm down because I get so excited about this scene. It's so effective. This big figure fills the doorway, and is a shot of Kurt's face, a quick shot of Leatherface, quick enough that you don't know what the hell it is. It's a close up, and then it cuts to the wide shot again, and hits him with the sledgehammer. Kurt falls down, holds for a second, then starts twitching.
Yeah,
and that sound of his foot on the ramp is just burned into my brain.
Yeah,
Leatherface picks him up, throws him out, slams the door shut, and it's all done in like 10 seconds.
Right. I mean, Kirk's death happens in a matter of seconds.
And there's no music, there's no score, there's no stinger. It's not really a jump scare. It's just it happens fast enough. It happened. You know what happens, but it also happened fast enough that you're like, what the hell was that? What was that?
It definitely provides a shock and awe because
absolutely
in that moment, like you said, it happens so quickly. You're trying to compartmentalize what the hell just happened.
Exactly.
You knew going in, at least when you watch it now, you maybe not in 74,
right?
But when you knew going in, when Kirk was like going in the house, there was potentially something there that he shouldn't go into.
Exactly.
But then the abruptness in which it happens, and like you're saying, the speed in which it's delivered, you're trying to get your bearings.
It's crazy. I mean, nowadays you'd have like some really intense music, and he'd walk through the house, and it'd build up a lot of tension, and then there'd be a fake jump scare, and then the real jump scare.
Right.
But here, it's none of that. It's just like he runs in, he's dead, and out. Then we're outside of the house.
It's a great scene.
It's so well done, and part of the effectiveness was actually an accident when they were shooting. So when he slams the door, he slammed it with such force that it just stuck, and it wasn't supposed to be that way. But that's how big Gunnar Hansen was. It slammed and stuck, and then it's just kind of that droning sound of the music. It just leaves you with like, what the fuck just happened?
And then we get a bit of a breath because we go back outside and we see Pam on the bench, and she's going, Kirk.
Right.
Kirk, are you out there?
Exactly.
And we know what happened. Of course, Pam doesn't.
Right.
But that scene is, it's truly effective. I think it's built really phenomenally. Like it's really shock and awe.
Yes.
And kind of that raw. And it also, when we go back to this, but like the way it's shot feels very documentary.
Absolutely.
Esque.
Absolutely.
Got me thinking about another thing when we're talking about that, which is an element of the film that I really like, and it kind of ties into this documentary style. But what I notice now is that, and you were alluding to this just a second ago, everything now is overproduced. Mm-hmm. Now, there's some pros that come along with that. Sure. There's pros and cons. But I look at things and everything's so stylized, everything's so produced well, it's almost too perfect. And I actually, when I was watching this film, I was thinking about that. And I actually thought, I like that it's not perfect.
Yeah.
I like that it's missing that overly stylized feel. Like everything's not just set up perfectly, and the design's not just, it's still real and still you feel it.
Exactly.
But it's not that over stylized, overproduced vibe.
It's really not. If you look at this movie, there is no score. There's no music. All that is just a droning sound at certain moments, but that's it.
Yeah. And
then diegetic music, like the country song playing. And I should have mentioned this when we were talking about the hitchhiker.
Yeah.
That country song playing in the background of the van when the hitchhiker's there, it just doesn't fit. It's weird. It just makes me feel uncomfortable.
It felt like it belonged in the movie Deliverance.
Exactly. It just, and there are a couple other moments where some diegetic music's playing where it's just like, ugh. It just doesn't feel right at all.
I was waiting for John Voight and Burt Reynolds to make an appearance.
Exactly.
It felt like Deliverance.
Yeah, definitely.
And that, not to divert and get off two movie tangents, but like that scene in Deliverance is creepy too.
Oh, absolutely.
And they use that offbeat, that what's the word? It's out of place music.
Yeah. To
disorient and make you feel
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And with Hitchhiker they do that too. So Leatherface gets his first kill.
Man,
at least for us, not his first kill in career all time,
but for us to see. Exactly.
But for us to actually see. I have a feeling Leatherface bats like 1,000.
Oh, absolutely. He doesn't fail.
Except for the end.
And he's pretty pissed about it.
And we'll get into that. So Leatherface, we see Leatherface get his first kill. Kirk is gone. Pam investigates.
Well, and I do want to say, did you notice the dolly shot under the swinging bench that she was sitting on?
Yeah, because it goes under the bench,
underneath
which
is and Steven Spielberg was fascinated by this. Oliver Stone's been fascinated by this shot, and in fact, some guys got jobs from Spielberg and Oliver Stone simply because they wanted to know how they did this, just simply so they could pick their brain about how this shot was done. So basically,
do we have some background on that? Because I'm curious. I actually thought about that.
It's actually
I'm glad you brought it up.
Unbelievably easy. It's ridiculous. So basically, all they did, they had two grips just lift up the bench, and they had it on a dolly. So the camera's behind the bench. Yep. It's at a low angle, and they had a dolly, and basically they had two grips just lift up the bench. But the problem was they didn't have enough dolly track. So they had two other grips running to set the track while they're doing the shot and trying to stay out of the camera light.
It's great, and
it's crazy.
And it was so fluid. It was so smooth.
And you'll notice in the remakes, there's always in the other installments to this franchise, there's always allusion to that shot.
That's great. It's funny you talk about dolly track because one of the viewings I was doing, so I bought the 4K restoration,
Nice.
40th anniversary edition on DVD, because I like having tangible, like digital's great.
Me too.
But also there's
the same.
elements that I like having a library of tangible movies.
Right.
So anyway, part of that comes commentary.
Yeah.
And I'm that guy.
Oh, me too.
I'll listen. So I was listening, and you bring up the dolly track, and they were talking about, and not to jump scenes, but at the end scene where Sally's running for quite a while, or not the end scene. I'm sorry, the scene where she's running after Franklin gets destroyed.
In the woods.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And in the woods, and it's only and Toby Hooper and the DP's name.
Daniel Pearl
were talking in the commentary, and I was listening to them, and they had if you watch that scene, it's cut in a way that they could only film 40 feet of track of her running and Leatherface chasing her, and then they'd have to stop and then reposition and then like do another 40 feet of track, and in different spots. So when you watch that scene, it's kind of it's not all over the place, but it's just in different parts of that little forest.
Okay.
Because they could only go for so long on the dolly track.
Right.
And the reason is that's all they could afford in the budget.
That's all they had. Yep. That's all they had.
So I like that you give the technical approach to how they shot the bench shot where it goes underneath.
Yeah.
And it uses the dolly. And it reminded me of this thing that the filmmakers were talking about at budget and how they had no dolly.
Exactly.
Or little dolly.
Yeah.
Great sidebar. Kirk dies. Pam goes in to investigate.
Yep. And the crazy thing is, Kurt was alive 10 seconds ago. And just like that, he's gone.
And quickly on that leg shaking, it's two things for me. It's either absurdly too much.
Right.
Or it's like his brain's been traumatized and it's creepy that his brain's telling his feet to act that way.
Well, and that's what made this.
It actually worked.
It absolutely did, but it made it all the more real because like I said, I wasn't deep into horror when I saw this movie, but when I saw that, and then he starts shaking, I'm like, that's something that would happen, right? Like I have no idea, but it seems like it's real.
It seems like it's real because it has to do with brain trauma, and and I'm not a doctor, but like once the brain is traumatized, it's gonna shoot out different nervous things to different appendages, and so it felt real. Either if it's not or who's ever listening who's a medical professional is like, Gabe's full of shit.
But it does. It felt so real. And that's when I'm just like, oh shit, we just went off the deep end here. Yeah. Like all the dread has been building up to this, and it did not disappoint.
It's a hell of an opener.
Exactly.
For a kill.
Exactly.
So Pam walks in, and what transpires? I want you to walk through this scene because to me, there's three things that are interesting, and I have them highlighted. But Pam walks in to investigate, and just walk me through the feeling and kind of how they filmed it and how it worked for you. Or
okay. Well, basically, we just saw Kurt die in a crazy, brutal, intense way, and we don't really know exactly what happened. And all we know is now Pam is going right into that environment, and she's way more vulnerable because she's a skinny female, and she has no defense at all against this big, lumbering, crazy person we just saw. Leatherface slams open the metal door, and she doesn't even wait. She just runs and starts screaming. He runs out of the house, grabs her in a very famous shot where he grabs her outside the door, drags her back into the kitchen, and then we see the hook. And we immediately know he's putting her on that hook. He is absolutely putting her on that hook. So he picks her up, puts her on the hook, and her acting is unbelievable because you can feel that hook in your back when he slams her on that thing. Because I think a lot of actors would have made the choice to start screaming, but she made the choice to make it seem like she couldn't even breathe.
Which I think is practically the right choice, because once the hook goes in,
I agree,
your lungs are now almost incapacitated. You can't breathe.
I agree. And this is the other scene that Jess, my girlfriend, that affected her a lot.
And that's what I put in my notes. And so when you walk us through that scene, there's a few things that I was telling you that kind of stand out. One is that, of course, Pam's a woman, and Leatherface is this overly huge, intimidating figure.
Exactly.
Of a man, we assume. We assume, right. Based on the physicality. There's kind of this weird setup for me, which is like Pam's death is slow. Kirk's death's really fast, why? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, good question.
If I go to Franklin also dies.
Yeah, it's a quick death.
Within seconds, right?
Yep. They keep Sally alive, though.
But Sally lives, so the females are always kind of, I guess, elongated in either their deaths,
Right.
or, or surviving.
Right.
And so the males die instantaneously, and they drag out these scenes, because that hook scene, that when she's hanging there, she's not dead.
Right. She's very much alive, and not only that,
In agonizing pain.
and she has to watch Leatherface chainsaw up her boyfriend
Right.
while she's hanging on a hook
Yep.
by her back.
So that scene is also, it's just filmed really well. Once again, not over stylized. They put the camera in the back of the room, and it shows him throw her up there.
Yep.
And she's just, like you said, out of breath, and it made me cringe in a way that felt like I was observing something I shouldn't have been.
Exactly. I mean, I imagine.
I felt like an eyewitness to a murder.
I imagine if I ever watched a snuff film, I would feel the same way.
That's what I mean. It's like, because we go back to that authenticity, and when I say eyewitness to a murder, it felt like it was real, and I shouldn't be watching it.
Absolutely.
It wasn't a horror movie for that second. I was like, I don't.
This
I
is
should probably turn
uncomfortable.
this off.
Exactly. Well, and if they would have shown the hook go in the back, if they would have shown it maybe even come out the front, I think it would have been far less effective.
I agree.
And there are people to this day who have watched it one time who swear that they saw that hook go into her back, and it didn't show it.
No, that doesn't. There's no hook in the back. There's no blood.
Not at all.
There's a slight blood on Kirk, like you can kind of see, but it's like very minimal.
Right.
And so Pam dies, but I found it interesting, and I don't know what it means. I don't know what it means to have the women survive, but I just was thinking about it. Like the men die quickly,
right,
and the women at least survive longer, or just survive altogether,
and are traumatized during the journey.
Yes,
very traumatized,
brutalized
by what they're seeing and what they're experiencing. For sure.
Yeah. And so Pam dies in this horrific death. Really, I mean, if you were to throw it up there, just the way, like we just talked about, the way it's put together, I mean, it's up there with some of the best kills ever.
Ever. Because it's real. Like, this isn't Jason killing someone by having them in a sleeping bag and beating them against a tree. This is something that you can imagine this actually happening.
Yeah.
It's not,
And to do that without an over-stylized approach and no blood and, that's pretty impressive.
It's insane. I mean, so simplistic and minimalistic, and it just works.
So Pam dies. So we have Kirk and Pam kill 1 and 2. They're gone. Mm-hmm. And then we cut back to Grandpa's abandoned house, and we have Sally and Jerry and Franklin.
Yep.
And it's starting to be dark at night. And
it's just about dusk.
And they're wondering, okay, where are these guys?
Yep.
Jerry's like, let me go investigate.
Yep.
It's now this, but see this wasn't a thing before. So this idea of like any horror film is like one person goes,
we gotta split up,
and then everybody starts going, hey, let me go investigate.
Right.
And then let me go investigate, and everyone one by one just starts getting taken off as they go to investigate.
Yeah.
By the way, a quick side that I couldn't get out of my mind, and I'm not trying to make light of it because I really do like the movie, but I kept thinking, are these guys? Is this the Mystery Mobile? Because
it felt like it.
It had a Scooby-Doo vibe to it when they were driving in the car, and it's like going on the freeway, and the van kind of had that VW look in a way.
Yeah.
And I was like, and there was all kind of young kids like going to figure things out. Let's go investigate the abandoned house.
Totally.
I was thinking
Scooby-Doo vibe. For sure.
It did. Except for Leatherface didn't get it. He would have got away with it.
Exactly. Absolutely. You can't pull the mask off Leatherface.
Exactly. They weren't going to reveal what happened.
Exactly.
I mean, even though the ending's got its own little thing that's kind of open, no one caught him.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway, sorry, I had that this Mystery Mobile came to mind. That's my nerdy young Scooby-Doo kid when I was a kid watching those cartoons. Sally, Jerry, Jerry goes to investigate. Walk me through the murder. Walk me through the murder, Alan.
And based on what we've seen already, this one is far less, because I've seen this movie, I can't even tell you how many times, but for some reason I always forget how Jerry gets killed. Because it's just not memorable compared to what we've just seen.
Damn it, now you got me trying to remember.
I know. So basically...
it's definitely insignificant.
Exactly. He walks in the house, and he's looking around.
I remember he goes in the house, and he opens up the freezer. And by the way, Pam is still alive in the freezer.
She's still alive. And she's kicking, and her body's twitching.
Yeah.
And he looks at the hooks, and he's like, what? And you could just read it on his face, like, what the hell is going on? And then he hears kicking in the fridge, and he opens it up. And I guess it is. I thought there was only one jump scare in the movie. I guess this is technically a jump scare. She pops up.
Well, they open the lid to the freezer, and it looked like she's done for.
Right.
And then she does the shock.
Right.
Yeah.
And then Leatherface comes in and slams him over the head, and that's the end of Jerry.
Yeah, he doesn't have a very significant death.
No, but the next scene is very significant. And this is why I love Leatherface so much, because this next scene is Leatherface freaking out. And this is why I think Leatherface is a very sympathetic villain, because he's being abused by his brothers.
Yeah.
So Leatherface doesn't kill because he wants to. He kills because that's just how he was raised. He was raised to just kill. That's what they do. They kill and they cook people. And he's freaking out because where are these kids coming from? One by one, these kids are invading his space, and he's freaking out. And he's looking out the window, and he's panicking. He's in full-on panic mode. Because poor Leatherface is just at home cooking, getting the house ready for his brothers to come home, and these people keep invading his home. And so he's not doing anything brutal. He's just doing what he's supposed to do.
And then it has that shot of him, like you said, looking out the window, and then there's this close-up of his distorted mouth, and his teeth are all jacked up. And are we supposed to believe then that at that moment Leatherface has some kind of deeper emotional trait as a character?
I think so, absolutely. And I think
interesting.
I think he's mentally ill, and obviously
I think that's probably fair.
Yeah, absolutely. That's an understatement. But I think he's definitely slow, obviously, and he just is an abused little boy who just grew up to be this brute of a man.
And that's kind of an interesting point, because we don't really have any exposition on Leatherface.
No, not at all.
You know, a lot of the characters, you have exposition. You look at something like Friday the 13th, or because it's the mother, right, in Friday the 13th.
Yep.
And then if you look at something like Halloween, of course, his is more from a young age, but there's just a mental illness.
But we do know everything about those guys.
And Freddy's a murderer.
Right.
We could verge on pedophile.
Right. Absolutely.
But we know their history.
Yep.
And it kind of gives them rhyme and reason, at least from a story perspective of who they are. But Leatherface doesn't have any exposition that I could pull from. Sorry, but I like that you're kind of going that route. I didn't initially think of it that way, but I kind of wondered what that scene was doing. Mm-hmm. I kind of watched it going, there's something there, but I wasn't sure. I can kind of see where your angle is.
Yeah.
Which is like, we're trying to get in a little bit deeper into Leatherface's emotionality and who he might be as a character.
Right.
Beyond what we're seeing with the slaughter.
And I think that's exactly, Gunnar Hansen, and if a lot of my knowledge comes from his book. It's called Chainsaw Confidential. So Gunnar Hansen played Leatherface, and it's about just making the movie. It's phenomenal. It's great. But that's how he wanted to play him. He wanted to play him as just a mentally ill, disturbed child, basically. And he doesn't know any better. This is what he was taught. It's like any of us, if you grew up on a farm, you're taught to farm. And sometimes you got to kill the chickens. And you don't think twice about it. It just happens. It just has to be done. And that's what I think Leatherface grew up with. At least that's my theory.
I like that theory. I also like that, what's nice is Toby Hooper allows us to kind of build our own exposition.
Yeah.
And everybody's going to be able to interpret it for their own way. And some people are going to watch this film and go, that's a fucking stupid analogy, or that's a stupid theory.
Exactly.
But and that's not to knock it, because I actually like where you're going with it. I really do. Yeah. I never thought about it. I just knew that scene meant something, because otherwise, why would you have it there?
Right.
I think Hooper's mostly all intentional in the way he puts it together.
I think so too.
So I think now that you say that, I go, oh, I could see that, and that might build some exposition for me into that character to kind of build a slight sympathy into who he is.
I mean, you could feel it if you're at home just doing whatever, and all of a sudden people are coming into your house. I
Yeah.
mean, you're gonna freak out a
An
little
invasion.
bit. Right,
Yeah,
exactly.
So Jerry dies. Leatherface feels bad about it. No, I'm just kidding.
Not at all.
No. And then we have Sally and Franklin. Now, keep in mind, Sally and Franklin are siblings.
Right.
And like we mentioned, Franklin's a paraplegic, so he's in a wheelchair.
Well, and then I'm going to interject real quick because this is the
it.
part, and I'm sorry, I can go on and on about this movie, but this was the part where the dread fully took me because everything we've just seen happens in broad daylight. Everything is broad daylight. And all of a sudden, Jerry dies, and it cuts to nighttime. And I'm just thinking, if this is what happened during the day, what is going to happen at night?
Yeah.
And this is where the dread fully just totally took me over with the first time I watched it. And again, I remember this vividly.
And Sally and Franklin basically fall in line, so now it's their turn to investigate.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
And they go off into the woods to investigate.
Exactly.
And as they're going through the woods, and I like that idea, which is like now it's dark, and now we're falling into that. It's always scarier at night, as we know. And the other thing that I thought he played into well was like the idea of like being in an isolated environment. Like I've actually been camping, whether as a young kid or whatnot, and going out into the woods at night, if you had to like pee, and like like going out into the woods by yourself, even if it's like 15 feet from the tent,
Scary.
it's still scary because it's dark around you and you're out in the middle of nowhere. And so there's a weird psychology that plays in your mind, like what's out there. So I like that he's playing into that now, like you mentioned, it's dark, and so that heightens the whole thing. And Franklin and Sally go out, Franklin in the wheelchair, and we start getting through, and then it happens quick again. They get out into the woods, and within a matter of seconds, Leatherface, quick jump cuts, kind of abrupt in the editing style, but like all of a sudden then boom, Leatherface is there, and he's got the chainsaw right in your face, in Franklin's face, and his whole body, and he's just chopping him up.
Yeah, I mean, really the main jump scare of the movie, and there's no music stinger. You don't need it. It's there, and it's terrifying. And
also non-bloody. Like there's a little bit of, once they cut back to that medium shot where we see the back end of Franklin and the front part of Leatherface, and he's pushing the chainsaw like into his chest, like, you know, and you see a little blood squirt, like a tiny little bit. But that's the other beauty about the film, once again, is all the deaths are pretty bloodyless.
It's crazy with how violent they are.
So Franklin dies immediately within seconds, and then Sally, his sister, just starts going, as you would. She runs for it.
Yep.
And Sally goes. This chase scene between Sally and Leatherface is quite interesting. I want you to break it down because I feel like the chase scene, it's really long.
It's very long.
So I'm thinking immediately in my logical sense is like, Leatherface got some stamina.
Right. Well, and Gunnar Hansen, to prepare for it, he would just, when he had a break on set, he would just run back and forth. Because he's overweight, man. He's got to carry a big chainsaw.
And he's a big guy.
And he's a huge guy.
So usually the oxygenation, and you're a big dude, you got to like, you know. But well, this chase scene's really long, and it goes for...
So did you think it was too long?
I don't know. A little bit. I was like, okay. And we were mentioning this before in the technical shots, which is like they only had so much dolly, and they actually filmed this a few different ways and could only track so many shots with the dolly. And it kind of just felt like they were trying to extend it a little bit beyond what it needed to be, maybe.
And I don't remember the first time I watched it if I felt this way, but watching it for the 15th or 20th time or whatever, it drags. For me, it drags because I already know what's going to happen, and it just drags. So I just wondering is kind of, it wasn't your first viewing, but it's kind of your first viewing in a very long time.
Like it, yep.
Because I was just wondering if it dragged
it
for
felt
you.
The pacing felt a little long, and up to this point, I actually was in tune the whole way, and then I was just kind of like, okay, I'm getting the picture of what's happening. I know Leatherface has got the chainsaw, and I'm ready for that next piece of information in the story. It's a very small detail, like a very small thing to kind of nitpick, but it felt like the chase scene was a little long. But eventually Sally, I mean, she's running all around. She runs back she goes through the woods and back to Leatherface's house.
And when you see that, it's like, oh God.
At first I was trying to like, is that his house? Because I wasn't sure. And then she
Right.
ran around to the front door, and he
Right.
does the weird like. There's a scene where she runs around the front door and he's running behind her, and
It's like the cartoon
it's
skid
like
to a stop.
exactly.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
felt very cartoonish,
Yeah.
but it was still kind of funny.
Well, and she goes in and she goes upstairs, and we meet Grandpa for the first time.
Old Gramps.
And you don't know if he looks dead. You just think he's a corpse, just like Grandma. Grandma's sitting there and she's a corpse.
It's that, and I have a couple things I want to get into with Gramps.
Okay.
So we'll get there. But we meet Gramps for the first time, and she gets up there. By the way, once she's up there, she's of course freaked out. She sees Gramps and she goes, and then she tries to run back down the stairs,
Yeah.
and Leatherface breaks through the door, and then there's this. This is the part that I loved. Sally don't give a shit.
No, dive bombs out the window. Just dive bombs out the window.
Just a dive bomb
Yeah.
out a 2-story window,
Yeah.
which practically is. I mean, the house is old, so it's passable.
Mm-hmm.
But if it was like a more well-built house and a
Right.
fabricated, like there's no way she busting through the window.
Right, exactly.
But
There's no way.
it's a little forgivable
Sure.
just
sure.
because of the situation. But I loved it. I
Oh,
loved
did
it.
too. It was great.
It's she might as well have been a pool outside because it
Seriously.
felt like she just dived out.
Just dove out.
And so she dives and she gets away from him. Right, he's chasing her this whole time, and she gets away from him finally. And there's a little bit of relief there for a moment. And we've built up all this kind of the chasing, and then we've introduced Grandpa, and she finally gets away. And then a little bit more ensues, and then she finally makes her way clear back to
The gas station.
the barbecue joint.
Yep.
I thought that was like far away, though.
I did too. There's a lot in this movie where I'm like, wait, that's not a hop, skip, and a jump away.
So Sally, to me, must have ran track and field in high school. 'Cause she's
Seriously.
got some serious stamina.
And Leatherface is keeping up with her.
And
the whole
Leatherface is
time.
keeping up with her the whole time. I was listening to commentary, like I mentioned, and the filmmakers were talking about how Sally was actually slow in her running.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and there were times where there were shots where Gunnar had to like slow down
Yeah.
because he was catching up to her too
Yeah.
quickly. So anyway, Sally gets back to the barbecue joint. We run into Old Man again. And Old Man is part of the cannibal family. And she breaks into the joint. And Old Man's trying to, at least initially, I'm thinking as a first watch. Now I knew, but as a first watch, I was thinking, oh, he's just trying, he's going to help her.
Yeah.
And so
Made
there's
the salvation.
here's the salvation. This is the guy, this is the savior of the film who's going to help her get away from all this nightmare.
Mm-hmm.
And then he kind of just flips a switch, in a sense.
Yeah. And it's just great because, again, Hooper he builds up the tension because Leatherface was just right there.
Right.
And then the old man goes out to get the truck, and the door's left open. And Leatherface is just right there. So I the whole time, the first time I'm watching this, I'm thinking Leatherface is going to pop in because she's so vulnerable, and she's just sitting there. And then she looks at the meat, and the radio's on. And
once again, we go to, so we knew that Leatherface was right there, and then all of a sudden he's not, and the
gone.
door's open, and Old Man's like, it's all okay. The door's open, and you're like, where's Leatherface? He should
Right.
be coming in here tearing this shit up.
Right.
And then Old Man goes out to get the truck, and that's another filmmaker technique, and we go back to it, and nothing. It's insinuated, and it's this implicit kind of way of putting it together, which is Sally sees the barbecue, and it's not overtly like, oh, that's human beings,
Right.
but it's implicit in the way they use that zoom lens. Right.
Absolutely.
And it's like it's insinuated that, oh, Sally's finally capturing what's going on.
Absolutely.
Here. And so that push in with the zoom lens is like Sally seeing the barbecue and going, oh no, I'm not in a safe place.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Old Man comes back in, and then he flips a switch and becomes radicalized in his own way.
Oh yeah. You can tell he's enjoying himself. That's why I don't buy the whole I don't enjoy killing thing.
I kind of buy the killing, but it's almost like he's the preparatory to the kill. He likes the antagonizing,
Yeah.
but he doesn't like to follow through with the actual kill itself.
Could be.
Because when he comes back in, then he knows at that point that she's put 2 and 2 together, right? Because and then he gets the broom, and that scene actually is a little clunkily put together.
Absolutely.
Everything up to this point's been pretty well made, but that scene with the broom, well, he's trying to like batter. Like I'm like, Sally just dive bombed through a window. Let's be honest.
Taken down by a broom.
She could beat the shit out of old man.
Exactly.
To be 100% honest, she could take old man out.
Absolutely.
So I had a problem with that because I was like, Sally's got this, and there's a little hole there for me to go. Sally could end this thing right now.
He's not even beating her with the hard end of the broom.
Yeah.
It's the end with the bristles.
And he's kind of doing it like a little kid would do it in an unsure way.
Yep.
He's like poking her.
Exactly.
Like, are you alive?
Right. It's like a little kid playing with an insect almost.
Yeah, exactly. So but nonetheless, he wins the battle and then ties her up and throws her in the truck.
And his little grin when he's poking her with it, he's like trying to be polite, like
as he's
hope
driving,
you're comfortable down there, and then he smiles. Pokes her with it.
We know now more than ever that he's definitely a creeper.
Absolutely.
Yeah. They start driving to the house. She's tied up. Then we see Hitchhiker. We start putting it together in the sense of like, oh, these guys are all part of one big happy family.
Exactly. Very dysfunctional happy family.
I mean, that's the thing about it. You can't even say it's beyond dysfunction.
And he just, the way the cook, the old man comes storming in, just looking for a reason to beat the shit out of these other two.
And you can tell that he's the older brother.
Yeah.
I actually thought old man was their dad.
I did it too the first time
but that's not what it is.
No, it's not. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when I was thinking about it, I thought he was old, but then we know they're brothers. And then he gets Sally into the house, and Leatherface is submissive to the old man, and he's also changed his face.
Yeah, because now he's the homemaker.
Now he's mom,
so
or grandma, or whoever.
Right, so now he's got the woman's face on. So
where's dad in all this?
That's a good question. I don't know.
Where's mom?
Good question.
Was she the decayed body, or was that grandma?
I think that was grandma.
Or is this a play into when dads go missing in families get dysfunctional?
It could be. It could be Toby trying to tell us something.
So anyway, but Leatherface has the domestic face on now, which is it creepier, or is it where does it fall in the face changes? Because I think there's 3 of them.
Yeah, I think there are.
Because there's the first, and then there's the mom, and then I think at the end it's changed again.
At dinner, he has the pretty woman face.
Dinner
on,
is when it is. That's right.
Yeah.
So he changes, and they start having a weird and old man is kind of the dominating, telling people, or at least appears to be the guy that's like telling everybody what to do. They sit down, they're having dinner. Sally's tied up while they're eating human beings.
Right.
And this dinner scene it's chaotic.
The whole thing is chaos. And when they go to the close up to her eyeball, I'm just like, the whole thing is just so uncomfortable. And you could just, and I guess when they were shooting, just the heat was unbearable during this scene, because they're all in there. They have all the crew in there. It's Texas. It's in the middle of summer, and they are just roasting in that house.
Right.
And I guess the smell was terrible. And it was just, and you can just, it really does come across in that scene. It just, the whole thing is disgusting. It's vile.
And also the way that it's edited, because once you start getting in, you see Hitchhiker in there, and then there's kind of a silence. It cuts back to Sally, and you start getting these extreme close-ups of the eyeball. And it kind of this is the one moment, because up to this point I was explaining before, for me, it was very observatory. Now it was real.
Right.
And it was spooky and it's authentic, but I was always kind of a fly on the wall observing what's going on. This scene for me kind of changed that. As I was watching it, I actually started seeing things through the lens of this character, Sally.
Yep.
And it felt like you're kind of in the seat of that kitchen table at the dinner table with them. And it has to do a little bit too with the editing style.
For sure.
Which is like, it's very abrupt. Right? It's got rapid cuts. Some of them don't feel, there's no fluidity to it.
Yeah, and there's no continuity.
There's no continuity because you're on one side and then the other. So it becomes very disorienting. But I think as a result of that, it allows me to kind of actually, for the one time for me in the movie, fall into the perspective or the POV of this particular character.
Yeah, great point. Great point.
Because
it's just chaos.
Then later, So, and then it's cutting to like Hitchhiker, and you don't hear everything he's saying, and then it cuts to old man, and he's like laughing, but it almost feels out of sync.
Yeah. Oh, totally.
Like
totally.
it just does not, it all feels so disjointed.
They threw in multiple takes of the same scene, I think,
Yeah.
is what they did.
So that scene to me is the one moment where I get to be part of, like, I'm actually the character's POV.
Mm-hmm.
Now, then they're at dinner, and then they start talking about who's going to kill Sally, basically. Whose turn is it, right?
Yep.
And then what do?
They say, we're going to give it to Grandpa. Hey, Grandpa, we're going to give you this one.
So,
Love it.
So they bring Grandpa down from the stairs.
Mm-hmm.
Grandpa has his own mask on, right?
No, that's just
That
Grandpa.
is his face?
That's his face.
See, I actually thought they put a human-skinned face on Grandpa.
It's very much a prosthetic for sure. Like in John Dugan, he was like 19 years old when he played Grandpa.
Yeah, he was a young kid.
Yeah, but it looks like a mask.
And in the commentary, Toby Hooper said Grandpa's supposed to be 108.
108 years old.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what he said.
Well, I just thought the whole time he was dead and they were pretending he was alive.
Yeah, but here's where we get to this utterly disturbing scene. And here's the thing. I saw on Facebook a friend of mine who lives in Louisiana. Her name's Brooke. Shout out to Brooke. And she had posted on her page on October 1st. She's like, happy October 1st and happy Texas Chainsaw Massacre Day. So I said, oh, yeah, we're going to do a podcast this week on Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I said, Brooke, and I PM'd her. I said, give me your scene. Mm-hmm. Give me something that just got you. Because she's a horror fanatic.
Sure.
And she goes, I want to read it to you.
Okay.
She says, hey, of course, I'd be happy to share with you my favorite scene. Man, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise is definitely one of my favorites. I even named one of my cats Chainsaw. I got to say the best from the original for me has got to be Grandpa. He is the creepiest thing about the movie, and I love it. When they are getting him to hit her over the head with a hammer, and of course, when he is sucking on her finger, oh man, if that doesn't give you the creeps from old Gramps sucking blood from a girl's finger, I don't know what will. But thanks so much. And then she goes on to say thanks. And then she sent me the scene on YouTube with that. And I just responded to her, thanks, Brooke. That's great. Old Gramps is definitely a creepy motherfucker.
Dude, the joy, and props to John Dugan who played him, because I don't know how you bring anything to that character, but the joy that he has when he's sucking on that finger.
That's what makes it so creepy. And I was watching it with my wife, and I this is the second viewing. And I told my wife, okay, watch his jig here.
Yeah.
He gets jiggy with it.
Oh, and you hear the sucking sound, and his hands are going up. He's doing his little dance.
Even his legs start moving.
His legs start to kick in. He's so happy.
That dance is disturbing.
It is so disturbing. I love it. I love it. I mean, I want to be him for Halloween.
That would be a good one.
That would be
a good one to be. It's going to require a little bit of work in the prosthetic area.
Right.
My
girlfriend actually came up with that one. I think it'd be so much fun.
That would be a good one to be. But that scene is utterly creepy. Oh. And the other thing, once after he's already sucked the blood, and by the way, also in the commentary, which I found interesting about this scene, was Gunnar was the one that was cutting her.
Yeah, and he actually cut
her finger.
And because they couldn't do it right.
It wasn't happening. They said they were like 12 or 13 hours into the day or whatever it was.
He was so frustrated that he just said, fuck it. And he took the safety thing off and cut her. She didn't know until years later when they were at a convention, like a Comic-Con type thing. And he told the story on a panel. Yeah. And she had no idea that he did it on purpose. Yeah. And so she was pissed at him after that. Great story, man. Like, I mean, you've been on set. I've been on set. It's horrible.
Whatever it takes. When you're 13, 14 hour, whatever the time is at that point, when you're in overtime, it's time to get take off the Scotch tape from the knife.
Exactly.
So, but that scene, so Gramps does his jig. He dances. He gets a little juice. It's so disturbing. Oh. Thanks, Brooke, for that shout out, because I agree with you. I think that scene is utterly, it's gross.
Good choice, Brooke. Good choice. That's, seriously.
But also at that point, once he cuts the finger, and then Leatherface is trying to hit her or help Grandpa hit Sally over the head. It's unsuccessful every time until they finally he actually kind of does it himself, doesn't he?
I think so, but they also drop it on her head once or twice too, on accident.
But they get her where she starts to act. Now we actually start to see blood. And up to this point, there hasn't been a whole lot of blood like we mentioned.
Right.
And so, but now here's a caveat or a little problem that I had in the Sally escape.
Okay.
It just was too easy.
Oh, totally. She just flings her arms around.
Like,
she's out.
Within
that was contrived.
Seconds, she's free, and these two guys are just wildly, frantically later after they get outside chasing after. And by now, the night has already become day, and now it's morning.
Yep.
But I wanted more, just in the moment, I just wanted a little more struggle. I wanted a little more a battle.
It's got to be something else, right?
Between them, just to kind of show that she was strong and forcefully got out.
Right.
And then once they're running down the road, okay, the craziness can ensue.
Sure.
But that scene for me was the other one that kind of was like, okay, let's strengthen that one a little bit. But like you said, and like we were talking about, it's also if that was the scene and they were on set all day, they're just I
think they were just done.
They're like, let's get it filmed.
Get out of here. We got to get out of here.
Exactly. But Sally escapes nonetheless, right? And starts running down the road.
Yep.
And Hitchhiker and Leatherface are after her. They follow her. Hitchhiker's doing a weird maneuver all the way down, following her.
And it's funny because you could tell he's taking pleasure because he could have got her at any point, but he's just slicing her in the back with his razor. He's just slicing her.
Okay, because I was unclear. I wasn't. It's hard to decipher that that's happening.
Right.
So now that you say that, I go, okay, it makes more sense.
Yeah.
Because up to that point, I thought Hitchhiker was just doing a weird taunting because he's weird. Because in the original scene of the film, we know that the dude's crazy.
Right.
So that makes sense. He's actually slashing her.
Slicing her back with the razor. Right.
Okay. They get out to the road.
And then Black Maria shows up.
Black Maria shows up.
That's the name of the truck.
Which, for those that follow film, Black Maria is Thomas Edison's film studio, or it was when he started, looking into filmmaking and putting together film. I think it's a shout out. I don't know for sure.
I think it's got to be. I would think it's got to be.
So the Black Maria trucker comes up. He stops. Sally's out in the middle of the road. Leatherface is out there. Hitchhiker's out there. And the truck driver,
Well, he hits Hitchhiker first.
So I can't forget about that.
Yeah, he slams Hitchhiker.
I can't forget about that.
So, just imagine, and I always tend to put myself in that trucker's shoes for a second. Imagine that. So you're driving down the road, you hit someone, you stop to pull over, and all of a sudden, this huge dude with a chainsaw is chasing a girl. What is going through your head at that point?
And I also, what's funny though too, I didn't think of it in those terms, and that makes sense. But I also thought this truck driver's a big motherfucker.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think I know Leatherface is wielding a chainsaw.
Right.
So there's that.
Right.
But I was like, this dude's a big guy.
Yeah. He could take him.
I feel like he could handle it.
He could take him, yeah.
So I was like, why is he running like a little wuss?
Right.
But then I realized also, okay, the chainsaw. I'm still playing that into it.
Sure.
But the truck driver, so he hits Hitchhiker. Hitchhiker gets flattened, which then answers my question later in Texas Chain in 2. But Hitchhiker's gone.
Yep.
It's actually a great scene too. Just it still kind of looks real. Like you kind of tell how they used it, but it still feels.
It feels like you're watching something happen.
And also the way they cut it together, it feels like it's happening in real time. Yeah. So Hitchhiker's dead. The trucker gets out. Sally runs around. They jump in the car. Leatherface comes after him, hitting the door with the chainsaw. They get out the other side of the car, start running down. It all happens real fast.
And it doesn't cut to the inside of the truck at all, which is interesting because most movies would do that.
Yeah.
And but it doesn't do that at all. You just that's why it feels so real.
And then the trucker kind of the truck driver just kind of disappears.
Well, he gets sliced by Leatherface.
He does?
Yeah, he does.
No, hold on. Here's what happens. He comes out the other side of the truck and he has the wrench.
That's right.
He has the wrench. He grabs a wrench out of his truck. And then he becomes like Nolan Ryan.
Right. fires a
It's like
fastball.
perfect shot right down the middle.
Exactly.
Knocks Leatherface over. And this is the first time I think we've seen physically a vulnerability to Leatherface.
Yep.
And that's just kind of okay. I can take it. But Leatherface falls, and then
The chainsaw
actually cuts him.
Yep.
And it looks very real. It's very kind of gross.
It's a
and you
very
see, like,
precarious shot they did with that because they had the stunt man, and it was the real buzzing chainsaw
yeah.
right above Gunnar Hansen's leg.
They said it was, and he had a metal plate over his leg.
Yeah.
And so
he was very nervous to shoot that, but it came out well. Came out really well.
it did come out well, and it looked real.
Yeah.
And the way they had kind of the meat come out of it.
Yep.
So Leatherface takes a fastball to the head. Truck driver, does he? I don't think he gets. He doesn't get hit by Leatherface, does he? Because at that point he's gone. Because then the other truck, just a little pickup truck, comes racing down the road and does like a weird.
God, I just watched. I swear to God, the trucker got chainsawed. I could be wrong though.
I don't think he does.
He might not.
I don't think he does. We'll do a fact check.
We literally just watched this.
We'll do a fact check.
Yeah, exactly.
But I don't think he does. But anyway, the pickup driver, or there's now a pickup truck coming down the opposite way of the road, and he does this crazy U-turn, and Sally, and that's a weird. It all just happens so fast.
It's disorienting.
I'm trying to figure out it's what's going on, but it works. And the only thing I had a problem with once again was Sally getting into the truck, because it takes like she dive bombed out a window,
right, and she can't get into the truck.
She can't get in the back of that damn pickup truck that's gonna free her,
right?
Because you watch that from that long shot, and she's trying to get over the wheel well.
It's so frustrating.
And she's like, and maybe they're playing into that.
Sure.
But at the same time, the practicality for me is like, this girl's dive bombed. No, by the way, not just out of one window.
Oh, that's right.
She's dive bombed out of two windows.
Exactly.
So she should be dive bombing into the back of that pickup truck.
Right.
But she gets in the pickup truck finally, and this whole time Leatherface is after her with the chainsaw, and the truck drives away. And it's actually this really beautiful shot. This is where it picks back up, and that all happens so quickly, and I'm trying to kind of figure it out. And then it kind of gets to the point where the pickup truck drives away, and here you have this famous scene of
great ending shot.
Great ending shot. It's the famous scene, and a lot of people know. Like, now, what I'm trying to figure out. Now, I love the shot of Sally in the pickup truck, and her response, laugh crying, and now she's actually covered in blood.
Yep.
And then the shot of Leatherface in the street, and we're talking about, he picked up some moves from Gramps.
Exactly. He's doing his own jig.
Because he's doing his own jig. What's that about? Give me your...
I don't know. He kind of just started, from what I remember reading about this, he just kind of started doing it. They told him, just kind of swing the chainsaw around, and he didn't know what they meant, so he just kind of did it. I don't really know the significance or what it means, especially in context of the character, because I don't know if Leatherface would do that. I can't picture him doing that. I don't picture him having the mental capacity to be that frustrated to swing the chainsaw around and show anger that way, because he's been taught not to show anger his whole life. So I don't know. To me, it feels out of place, but it's a gorgeous shot, and it's iconic.
It doesn't fit the film, and I agree with that, but then you forgive it.
Yes.
In some weird way, I forgave it. I was like, I don't understand what he's doing,
right,
emotionally, or if that fits his character, like you said, or it doesn't fit his character. But part of the style, and this is funny because up to this point, stylized, beautiful cinematography really hasn't been a driving force.
Takes a backseat, right.
And then this last shot's really just beautifully done, and you're getting that golden hour.
Yep.
And it just looks real beautiful. And it also leaves it open-ended. He's doing his dance in the street, freaking out.
Right.
And then it just kind of, that's it.
And I don't know if that shot would be as effective or as iconic if they didn't do a hard cut to black right there. And you're just left with the sound of the chainsaw, and it just cuts to black.
Yeah.
And then it's black for a second, and then the credits start popping up.
And the credits start rolling. And there is a resolute ending to a degree. I mean, everyone's been slaughtered up to this point, but he does decide to let the heroine, or Sally, live. And so there is a finale in a sense that, like, she's now escaped this horrific event of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Exactly. Well, I mean, the tagline for the movie is "Who will survive and what will be left of them," and that's exactly. I mean, imagine going on. How do you even?
Well, I mean, Sally she may have lived physically,
right,
but mentally, she's dead.
Which brings me to the prevailing theory is that this movie is about the Vietnam War, and that's and it makes sense in that context because those, they went through hell. Those soldiers went through hell. And they had to do and see horrific things. And how do you survive after that?
That's very interesting. And I think I've heard hints of that. But when you say that, I can see that and start to contextualize that concept or that theory. Because the idea, like we just said, is that Sally now has to go on and live this life.
Yep.
And she'll never be able to overcome having seen what she saw.
Exactly.
It's always going to be part of her.
Yep. And like you said, the whole thing is just about death. There's just death everywhere you look. And so that,
starting to put these through lines together and these tying themes, I like that summation of it. I always like looking for, like, what's that real deeper meaning and what's that subtext to the film. And I like that one. 74, and I'm not a historian, so Vietnam's like, what, mid-60s to mid-70s-ish?
I think so.
It's that 10-year span, and I could be off. Apologies to those that served it, and I don't know the history behind it.
So it ended on April 30th, 1975, so not even a year after this was released.
And so that's interesting because there's a lot of historical and cultural and societal conflict going on in the late 60s, early 70s with with our culture and with people kind of coming across as like anti-war and rightfully so, but at the same time there was also kind of a backlash against, if I'm recalling this correctly, there's a little bit of a backlash against the soldiers.
Absolutely.
Although it's not their fault.
I think it was. I
There's
really
kind
think
of
it
a
was
historical thing there.
A public who is, and we don't want to get too deep into this, but I think it was a public who was so tired of this thing, and they didn't know where to place their anger, so they placed it
sounds
right there.
I would say that's fair.
Yeah.
And so they didn't know where to put it, and the reality is it's quite the opposite. And if we're going to take that thesis from this film, I could see that tying in.
Definitely.
Which is like people getting thrown into situations that are real,
right?
And not being able to. There's nothing you can do about it.
Nope.
And then you got to come out the other end, pretending or living as if it didn't happen.
Right.
To a degree.
Right.
So that's an interesting thesis. I like that.
And this, usually with any movie, if it affects me, I like to find out what it's about. I like to find the subtext. This one, I've kind of tried to avoid doing that because I just love this movie so much for what it's like what we talked about with Nightmare. It's childhood trauma, and for some reason, I keep coming back to the well.
Yeah.
And I'm searching for another horror movie that will make me feel what I felt the first time I saw this. And the closest I've come to is watching Hereditary. That was the closest I've come to just having that feeling of just like, oh my God.
Yeah.
What did I just witness?
That is a well put together movie. That was actually filmed here in Utah.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
So we won't get into Hereditary, although that's a good. There's a whole podcast in that.
Yeah.
Look, this is a great run through of really, like we talked about pioneers in the horror genre, and if you're looking at kind of creating an idea of what it means to be a film of horror, I think this is up there amongst the tops.
I agree.
Want to read a couple ratings just to kind of give context, and then get yours. So Texas Chainsaw Massacre, 1974, It's got an IMDb ranking of 7.5 out of 10. Rotten Tomatoes has it currently at 88% on the critics and 82% on the audience.
Okay, again, the critics are higher on it than the audience.
This happened last time, no?
Yeah.
And I think the critics are right again.
Yeah, I do too. I think the last 3 movies that I've joined with this, it's been that way.
Yeah, that's interesting because I always feel like usually it's the opposite of that.
Yeah, me
and
too.
the critics are wrong and the audience is right.
Right.
So we just give those out just to kind of give an idea. But then if I ask you, Alan, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre enthusiast that you are and the horror buff that you are when it comes to films, if you have to place it on a 1 to 10, where are you going to put it?
Well,
I got a feeling I might know where this goes.
It's tough for me. Like I'm a tough grader, but I love this movie, and I don't know how much is nostalgia, how much is shock value, but I'm giving it a 9, and that's about as high of a rating as I can give a movie.
That's interesting. I thought you were going to go 10.
No, I don't think I'll ever give out a 10 unless it's just flawless.
I'm a high grader.
Uh-huh.
And I have given out a 10 before. This movie for me, similarly, like I think it's really fun. It's darkly disturbing in its reality.
Mm-hmm.
And I like it for that because we're not setting up a supernatural phenomenon.
Right.
You know, with the other horror villains, and we talked about this last time. Where do these monsters fit on the all-time horror scale? And so I gave Krueger the rating of 1 last time. You came in with 2 on Krueger, which only leads me to believe you're going to throw Leatherface as number 1.
Leatherface is number 1 for sure. And I would actually kind of include all the family in Leatherface.
Yeah, the families of cannibals. So. For me, Leatherface is an interesting character, and he's, once again, I like where you kind of led me because I don't know that I was initially thinking of it that way with some of the deeper emotionality of who he might be. I like playing into the idea of who his past, what his past might have to do with his current state. But he's absolutely brutal. I mean, the brutality is evident.
Absolutely.
In the first kill, when Kirk gets taken out, great kill scene. And so, but Leatherface still like there's so much confusion surrounding him for me that I'm trying to figure out where to place him.
Because he's not your typical scary monster. There's humanity in him.
Yeah.
And you don't know what it is, but there's humanity in actually all these characters, I think, except maybe the hitchhiker. He's bananas out of his mind.
Yeah.
So I think I understand, like, because when you think horror icons, you're thinking just pure
evil,
brutal evil.
Not the Leatherface.
Right, exactly. But I
know what you're saying.
There's an innocence to him that kind of I can understand why it would knock him down.
Yeah, there's a duality to his character, and so I'm gonna throw for me, I would probably place Michael Myers ahead of him. Mm-hmm. And then I might go with Leatherface or the Cannibal Family in like a 3 or 4 spot.
Okay, so you probably
I have him at 3,
okay.
but I may even throw, looking at something like Jason, or Jason Voorhees, or I think just for the longevity of what the franchises of those are.
Yeah.
Because the one thing that Texas doesn't have for me is, I mean, it's got reboots and prequels and whatever, but I kind of like the longevity of a franchise when it comes to horror. I think culturally we're kind of into that. Look at new ones like Saw, like so I actually might throw Jigsaw up there too.
He could be up there
in the top 5 or 6. But Leatherface, I'm still trying to figure out, and maybe it takes another viewing again.
It's tough
to really start to look into it deeper. But I'll throw him in the top 5.
Yeah, I think so.
I'll throw him in the top 5.
Yeah, I think so.
And the reason I would do that is for the humanity's there, but I didn't get into that as much as I thought I would until you explained that to me, and I go, oh, that makes sense. However, the authenticity, the realism, makes him scary.
That's just what stuck with me. And I just remember I watched this the first time at my buddy's house, and he kind of lived in a place with a big yard, lots of woods around his house. and getting picked up by my mom and having to go out in that. It was just terrifying.
Yeah.
To make the
somebody cut that wood.
Seriously, like the 10-yard sprint from his front door to my mom's car just scared the shit out of me.
Yeah.
More terrified than I've ever been in my entire life.
I mean, the idea of cannibalism is scary.
Yes.
And so there's a lot of elements. Look, this is a great movie. I'm going to come in out of 10. I'm going to go in. I'm a higher grader. I'll actually give it, I'm going to go an 8 out of 10.
Nice.
Yeah. So let me read you. I want to read you one of these plot lines. I'm not going to read them all, but being the professional that you are, I want to read this plot line to you. Let's see if I can get it to come up here.
It's the worst when you need it right now.
And the internet's not, okay. Here's one from anonymous internet person. I won't give their handle out. 2 siblings and 3 of their friends en route to visit their grandfather's grave in Texas end up falling victim to a family of cannibalistic psychopaths and must survive the terrors of Leatherface and his family.
I mean, it's accurate.
Okay. Don't love it, though.
Don't love it.
I don't love it. There's something missing there.
Yeah.
Right? Something missing there. Here's one more. A group of 5 hippies on a road trip. Sorry, I got to start over. A group of 5 hippies on a road trip through the backwaters of 1970s rural Texas fall prey to a murderous cannibalistic family making up of a leather-masked chainsaw-wielding maniac, his knife-wielding grave robber brother, and their cannibal chief father and decaying grandfather.
I mean, I don't like that one. Are you still going?
It's convoluted.
It's convoluted. You're giving way too much away. I don't know if there's a way to write a synopsis for this that accurately describes what you're going to feel and see.
I got to read this last one.
Okay.
Sally Hardesty and her wheelchaired brother Franklin, along with 3 friends, travel to a cemetery where there have been grave robbings. To continue their trip, they pick up a hitchhiker. The hitchhiker turns out to be a crazy, so they drop him off and proceed with the trip. I can't even move on. And now I'm going to.
You did a good job. You made it way far in that without laughing.
And the handle was Harry Potter something.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. Oh my God.
I'm sorry. There was about another paragraph and I couldn't get through it.
Yeah.
So anyway, I agree. I don't know that there's even, you could write a plot, of course, or a summary. But this film's got what I do appreciate about it is that there's some rounded out characters. They're deeply complex, multi-dimensional. We're unsure how to, and the multi-dimensionality of Leatherface is great. And I like that you alluded to that. And I just think this is a fun movie. And I think for darkly fun, I think for the month of October, this is a have to watch.
I agree.
You got to go sit down and watch it. If you want to get kind of deeply disturbed.
There's always, when I was younger, I used to watch a lot of horror movies at Halloween, and there's always one that I would watch and I'd be like, all right, I'm done watching horror movies until next year.
Yep.
This is that movie.
This is it.
Yeah, I really believe that.
That's a great outro. I think go watch the Texas Chainsaw Massacre as your last film this month in the horror month, and you won't want to watch another one for another year.
Totally agree.
Awesome. Alan, thanks for talking.
Oh, thanks for letting me jabber about this.
This is Tame Aperture Podcast. Next week, we are going to talk Fright Night, 1985 version, because there's a newer contemporary version, with our friend Donnie from Louisiana. He's going to Skype in. He is a film producer, film instructor, and horror enthusiast, and he's going to bring up the classic 1985 Fright Night. This is the Tame Aperture Podcast signing out. Thanks for listening. Take care, everybody.
The Tame Aperture Podcast is produced by Dutch Angle Pictures in association with Studio B Productions. Listen, watch, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, and YouTube.